Okay, so I'm very excited about this workshop because this is one of my favorite topics in music theory, chords. And I can tell from the introductions that some of you are very familiar with chords, others maybe not quite so much. So I'm going to be as detailed as I can so that those who are not as familiar hopefully will be able to get something out of this. So depending on where you are in your musical background and music production background, you may have some questions about chords. So some questions might be, what are the different kinds of chords and how are they built? And why is it that some chords sound pleasant and some sound harsh? How do you group a bunch of chords together into a progression that makes sense? So in this session tonight, I'm going to try to answer two of those questions, and that is, what are the different kinds of chords out there, and how are they built? Okay. There's a couple of terms I'd like to talk about first, and that is the terms are consonants and dissonance. So what do they mean? They are terms that are applied to intervals and chords. Okay. Consonance is refers to a quality of a chord that makes it sound like it is stable or at rest. Dissonance is pretty much the opposite. It refers to a quality of tension or movement. And this is really sort of like a sliding scale. Some chords are very dissonant, some other chords are a little bit dissonant, and some chords are not dissonant at all. And the amount of dissonance that you might come across in music sometimes depends on the genre. For instance, some genres of jazz will use dissonant chords more often than you might see them in, let's say, a top 40 pop tune. And historically speaking, if you look back over the centuries of what composers of classical music have done, you would see as time goes on that composers incorporate more and more dissonance into their music. And the reason for this is that dissonance is a very important tool for expressing a range of emotions in music. Okay. Now, before we can talk about chords, we have to first talk about intervals. And basically, an interval is the distance between two notes. And those notes can be played together in a chord, or they can be consecutive, like in a melody. You can measure the distance between any two notes. And the way we do that is we count the number of half steps and whole steps between the notes. And I'm gonna talk about that in detail. So this chart shows some of the intervals within an octave. So let's make sure that everybody understands what an octave is. So here's my little keyboard. And if I play any key on this keyboard, and then I look up the keyboard to the next key that has the same letter name.
Oh, we can't see your keyboard, Janet.
Oh, you can't see it.
Should we be able to?
Oh, hang on a second.
No worries. And actually, just so everyone has their own, just in case you don't happen to have a keyboard at home, I'm going to send everyone a link to a virtual piano so you can follow along as she does.
Can
Uh,
you see it? Can you see it
Yeah.
now?
yep, we can see it
Okay,
now. And
okay,
then also, this is the link for everyone else in the chat, just in case
okay,
you want
cool.
to follow along. Go ahead, Janet.
Okay, okay. So to repeat, if I play any key on this keyboard, let's say G, if I move up the keyboard to the next note that has the same name, that's an octave. Okay, and between those two notes are a series of half steps. So every key on a piano keyboard is a half step from the keys right next to it. Now, if you're a guitarist, the analog to this would be frets. So every fret on a guitar is a half step away from the frets near it. Okay? And if you put two half steps together, you get a whole step. Okay? So from F to F sharp is a half step, for instance. From F sharp to G is a half step. From B to C is a half step because there's no key in between it. Okay? So, going back to this, you guys can still see the intervals chart, right?
Yes.
Okay, okay. So let's take a look at some of these intervals and play around with them a little bit. The three kinds of intervals that we're going to look at, that we're going to focus on, are the major, the minor, and the perfect intervals. There are other kinds of intervals within an octave, but we're not going to talk about those tonight. Okay, so let's take a look at the example that I give, for instance, for a minor second. So the example is E as the bottom note, F as the top note. The distance between these two notes is 1/2 step. That interval is called a minor second. So anytime two notes are a half step apart, you can say that the interval between those two notes is a minor second. Okay. If we start on the same note, let's say E, and now we make the top note F sharp. Now we have a half step from E to F and a half step from F to F sharp. Two half steps make a whole step. So the distance from E to F sharp is a whole step. That's known as a major second. Okay. Let's see. Sometimes people will use the term semitone instead of half step. It means the exact same thing. Okay. Let's take a look at one more set of intervals, the third. Again, starting on E. If the top note is G, what is the interval between them? The interval from E to F is a half step. F to F sharp is another half step. F sharp to G is another half step. 3 half steps or 1.5 steps. And that is a minor third. If we change the top note to a G sharp, that adds another half step, making 4 half steps, which is the same as 2 whole steps. That interval is known as a major third. Okay. Something else I'd like to point out about intervals, and let's see if I can, okay, yeah. Let's take a look at the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth. Something that you can do with intervals is called inverting them. So that means you can flip them over or sort of create a mirror image of an interval. So if we look at the two perfect intervals, the perfect fourth, the example that I give is C on the bottom with F on top. That is a perfect fourth. But if I take this C and I jump up an octave, so I flip the perfect fourth around, now I have a perfect fifth. So a perfect fourth inverted becomes a perfect fifth. And I have another slide here that we can take a look at that will summarize all of that. So when you invert an interval, if the interval is a second, it becomes a seventh, and vice versa. If it's a third, it becomes a sixth. If it's a fourth, it becomes a fifth. The easiest way to remember this is that the two numbers add up to 9. So a second becomes a seventh because 2 and 7 is 9. A sixth becomes a third. A fifth becomes a fourth. Also, when you invert an interval, if you're inverting a minor interval, let's say you're inverting a minor third, it becomes a major sixth, and vice versa. Okay? A perfect interval, when you invert it, stays perfect, of course, because it's perfect. Okay? The interval that we're going to concentrate on in our chord building is going to be the third, the minor third and the major third. Okay? As you can probably tell, I like charts. But this chart, I hope you will grow to like as well, because you can actually use it to help you create chords. Let me move this keyboard out of the way for a second. So these are what I would call the fundamental kinds of chords that there are. So any advanced chords that you might come across are really based on these 9 different chords, and I've grouped them in 2 categories: major chords and minor chords. Let's not pay attention to this bottom part yet. I'll get to that later. Major chords are chords where the first interval in the chord is a major third. Minor chords are chords where the first interval in the chord is a minor third. And as you can see, there are other chords that are related to major chords, and there are lots of chords that are related to minor chords, and we're going to go through them. So let's take a look at the first example. First example is a major triad, and the chord that I'm using as an example is C. So the way this chart can work is you can take any note that you want and use it as the root. I just, in this example, I'm using C as the root. So the root of a chord is very important because it's the note that the chord is built on. And you will always find the name of the root in the name of the chord. So, for instance, G major 7th, the root of that chord is G. The A minor chord, the root of that chord is A. Even a complicated name like D minor 7 flat 5, the root of that chord is D. So the name of the chord will always tell you what the root is. Okay, so let's say we start on C. We want to build a C major triad. So C is the root. The first interval we need is a major third. So we have to find out what note is a major third above C. When I look at my little cheat sheet up here, a major third is 2 steps apart, 2 whole steps apart. So here's 1 whole step, C to D. D to E is another whole step. That makes 2 whole steps. So from C to E is a major third. But we need 1 more note because we're building a triad. And a triad is a chord that contains 3 notes. So starting from the E now, we need a minor third above the E. And a minor third is 1.5 steps. So here's a half step, and here's a whole step. So from E to G is a minor third because it's 1.5 steps. So we put it all together, C, E, G. We have a C major chord. And you can build any major chord starting on any root by using these 2 intervals in this order. Okay. Now let's take a minor 7th chord. So in this example, we have F minor 7th. So how do we build an F minor 7th chord? Well, we need the root, which is F. Let's see, I'm going to make sure. Okay. Then we need a minor third above the F. A minor third above the F is 1.5 steps. Here's 1 step, and here's a half step. A flat is a minor third above the root of F. Okay? The next note that we need, now starting from the A flat, we need a major third on top of the A flat. Major third is 2 whole steps. So here's 1 whole step. Okay. Now this one's tricky because now we need another whole step on top of this. So where is the whole step? From here to here is only a half step. So we need to go another half step from B to C. So A flat to C is 2 whole steps, or a major third. But this is a minor 7th chord. So when you see the number 7 in the name of a chord, that usually means that we're talking about a 4-note chord, not a triad. So we need another note. And what note are we going to use? we need to find a note that's a minor third above the C. And it's, let me see if I can move you guys out of the way. Okay, good. Here we go. A minor third is 1.5 steps. Here's one step, C to D, and here's a half step, D to E flat. So C to E flat is the minor third. So we put it all together, F, A flat, C, E flat, an F minor 7 chord. Okay. Now I'd like to briefly talk about these other chords that I have on this chart. These chords are constructed a little differently, but they're very useful all the same. The first one is called a power chord. This is, it's just a 2-note chord, and the example I give here is F5. So that's how you would see it written on a piece of sheet music. F is the root. The 5 means add a perfect fifth above the root. So a perfect fifth is 3.5 steps. I'm not going to count it out, just trust me. Perfect fifth above F is C. That's a power chord. You very often find these kinds of chords in very fast, aggressive styles of music like hard rock or metal, usually played by a very distorted electric guitar. Okay, the next kind of chord that we have is called an add chord. You would read this, here, this is an example of one, G add 9. Those kinds of chords, let's use this example, are usually based on major triads. So you'd start with the G major triad. Add 9 means the 9th note is being added to it. And we'll talk about that when we talk about scales and keys. Or G add 9. So an add chord means you're adding an extra note to the chord, but that extra note is not the 7th. Okay. Another kind of chord that's very common are suspensions, and these are they're kind of my favorite. I like these. And the most common type of suspension chord you would find is called a sus4 or a sus chord. Again, you can start, you can build these starting from a major triad. We'll start from the C major triad. The way to build a sus chord is, instead of having the E in this case, the major third interval, we take that out and we put a perfect fourth in there instead, but we keep the other notes the same. And so these chords have a very sort of floaty, suspended kind of sound to them, which can be really neat. And finally, another kind of chord you might see is called a slash chord. And you would read this as, in this example, you would read this as C minor 7 over B flat. So when you see a chord, the name of a chord in a piece of sheet music, if you don't see a slash after the name of the chord, you can assume that the root of the chord is going to be the lowest note that you're going to play. Let's say if you're playing the keyboard, okay? So a slash chord tells you that the note after the slash is going to be the lowest note played in that chord, not the root. So anytime in a piece of sheet music, anytime you want to play a chord where a note other than the root is the lowest note, you would see that written as a slash. So normally this is a C minor 7 chord, but a C minor 7 over B flat would be this. This B flat now is the lowest note, not the root, which is C. Okay? Alrighty. I would strongly encourage you to play around with these chords. Use the chart if it helps you to figure out how to build these chords. Each of them have a very distinct sound. Some of them are very dissonant, like for instance, a full diminished seventh is a very dissonant chord. and some of them are quite pleasant, like a G major 7 chord. But I think it would be helpful to you as far as ear training goes to really try to internalize the sounds of these different types of chords. And you could even test yourself and see if the music that you listen to, see if you can pick out what chord qualities they're using. Are they all minor chords? Are they all major seventh? See if you can sort of figure that out. Even without knowing exactly which chord it is, you can teach yourself to learn how to pick out the different chord qualities. Now, I've provided this chart for you to help you sort of get right into building chords, but we're not really putting them into context here, and that would require us to talk about scales and keys and things like that, which I'm going to save for another session. But in the meantime, if you want to just play around with these chords, this would be an easy way to do that without having to worry about what key you're in and what scale you're using. Okay, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you all very much, and I hope that you find it helpful.
Thank you so much, Janet. This
Thanks,
is,
Janet.
guys, this is amazing.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
How
Janet.
amazing is that
Okay,
part?
great. Okay,
That's
so
the best part ever.
I see some questions in the chat. Let me see.
I'll read some to you. I think I asked, what are two semitones called? Like
A whole tone.
a whole tone. Got it. Okay, cool.
Right, or a whole step.
And-
Some people call it a tone, a step. It means the same thing.
Got you. Like a half step or a whole step. And
Right.
then you could do a semitone or a tone, or you can call it, are those the two, I guess?
Well, yeah, usually people, sometimes people measure intervals just in semitones, like, what, I can't think of anything offhand, because I don't think of them that way, but some people just say, instead of 2 whole steps, they'll say 4 semitones, but it's the same thing.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Debbie had a quick question. Can we get that chart though?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm going to do the same thing I did with the last one. I'm going to put up all the slides, including the charts, on our Discord server, I guess, right? So
Yeah,
everybody
awesome.
can.
And let me also put a link to Discord. I totally
Yeah,
forgot to do that.
and we're recording this, so you can listen to it again. Nefertiti, you had a question about the slash chord.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that no. The answer to your question is no. That's the simple answer. The more elaborate answer is that's a voicing question. So sometimes it depends on how you want to voice the chord. A chord voicing has to do with which notes of the chord are you playing, where are you playing them, which octave are you playing them, which ones are you leaving out. So normally, I guess maybe because I was doubling the 7th there, right? So I was playing the 7th as the top note and as the lowest note. You might not want to do that, but that's a voicing issue. Okay.
Thank you.
In this case,
Suspended chords. Yeah, I love suspended chords. You can string a whole bunch of them together and never resolve anything, and it sounds wonderful. Okay. Okay, does anybody else have any questions that didn't,
I had a quick question, Janet. When you had the slides with the inversions, like the 2nd and the 7th that added up to 9, like,
yes.
what's like the significance of that? Like, what's the of them being like inversions of each other? Or
Well, that could come into play when you talk about inverting chords, chord inversions, and also, as I said, voicings. So
what is voicings exactly? Like, what are voicings?
Voicing is, so let me just bring up my, all right. No, I guess now I'll have to share my screen. Okay. So let's say you're playing a major triad. So normally speaking, let's say you want to play the C major triad. So you're playing C, E, and G on keyboard. You don't always have to play it that way. You could play E, G, E, G, C in that order, or you could play G, C, E in that order. Those are inversions of the chords.
And that's also voicing.
And
So
that, well, hang on. It's a 2-part answer. So So not only can you play the notes of the chord in a different stacked order, you can also leave one out or put one in the bass instead. Like a great voicing is like in a minor chord, you put the minor third in the bass and you play just the root, the fifth in the other hand. It's a very, it gives it a very distinctive quality. So knowing the inversions can be helpful if you want to decide where you're going to play these notes, which octave you're going to play the note in. So like the chord the example I had, a G add 9, you could play that extra, that 9 up an octave, or you can play it below an octave. And if you play it below an octave, then it's a second. So it's helpful to know that you can flip the inversions around and what that does to the sound of the chord.
Okay,